Imagine stepping outside your door, and within exactly 120 seconds, your exposed skin completely freezes and dies. It's minus 40 degrees. There are absolutely no trees, no modern tech, just an endless, brutal wasteland of ice stretching across the prehistoric Eurasian steppe. For decades, history textbooks told us a very specific story about this era. They told us our ancestors survived this literal apocalypse by huddling together in dark, damp, random caves, shivering and praying for the sun to come back. But that story is a complete lie. What if I told you that 30,000 years ago, early humans weren't just hiding from nature? They were actively out-engineering it. Long before the first brick was ever laid or the first city was ever planned, these people were utilizing advanced thermal insulation principles that modern architects are copying today. Archaeology is finally uncovering the truth. Our ancestors didn't just survive the Ice Age, they hacked it. They were elite, prehistoric engineers who manipulated the laws of thermodynamics so perfectly that it will permanently change how you look at your own home. And the final secret of how they conquered the ultimate winter? It's a design so flawlessly effective that modern military special forces are literally copying it today. But to understand how they pulled off the impossible, we have to look down. Here's the first thing pop culture gets completely wrong about Ice Age humans. They didn't rely on caves. Because on the endless, freezing Eurasian steppe, caves didn't exist. If you can't find a shelter, you have to build one. And they realized something brilliant about the Earth. At an excavation site in Kostroma, Russia, dating back an astonishing 800,000 years, researchers uncovered massive, perfectly circular depressions carved 8 to 12 feet deep into the soil. Tool marks in the earth proved these weren't natural sinkholes. They were deliberately calculated excavations. Why? Because the air above ground might be negative 40. But if you dig exactly 6 to 8 feet down, the ground temperature stabilizes. It stays up to 30 degrees warmer than the killer winds above. They weren't fighting the cold. They were going beneath it. But sitting in a dirt pit will still kill you from dampness and exposure. Here is the part that will blow your mind. When archaeologists excavated the Dolní Věstonice site in the Czech Republic, dating back 26,000 years, they didn't just find primitive walls, they found a highly sophisticated triple-layer thermal barrier. It was a wearable, architectural spacesuit. Layer 1, the innermost wall, lined entirely with heavy animal hides, fur facing inward, to capture and reflect 100% of their radiant body heat. Layer 2, the middle core. They packed this with a precise density of dried grass and moss. This acted as a prehistoric sponge, aggressively wicking dangerous condensation away from their living space. Layer 3, the exterior shell. Woven mats of thick reed and bark. This outer shell was engineered to be entirely windproof, yet perfectly breathable. It let interior moisture escape before it could freeze and expand, which would have destroyed the structure from the inside out. Vapor barriers, insulating foam, weatherproofing. This is the same physics used inside the drywall of your modern house. But digging a hole works great if you have soft dirt. What do you do when the ground is rock-solid permafrost? There are 0 trees for miles, and you have absolutely nothing to build with. You build a fortress out of monsters. In the 1960s, at sites like Mezhyrish in Ukraine and Kostenki in Russia, researchers unearthed something that made the global scientific community stop dead in their tracks. They found actual, engineered buildings made entirely out of the remains of woolly mammoths. Our ancestors harvested massive mammoth skulls, some weighing over 200 pounds, and inverted them, burying them deep into the perimeter as solid, immovable foundation blocks. Then, they utilized the natural geometry of giant mammoth tusks, interlocking them at the top to create a perfect, self-supporting dome. They filled the structural gaps with hundreds of smaller bones, locking them together like a prehistoric jigsaw puzzle, and wrapped the entire skeleton in heavily stitched mammoth hide. Experimental reconstructions of these bone domes by modern archaeologists reveal a staggering fact. A properly built mammoth house could maintain an interior temperature 40 to 50 degrees warmer than the deadly air outside. Using only bones, animal fat, and stone tools, they matched the thermal performance of modern, industrially insulated Arctic shelters. But there is a massive catch. Building a mammoth bone house took 2 to 3 weeks of intense physical labor for 8 to 10 adults. You cannot do this in the middle of a blizzard. Analysis of toolware and seasonal indicators at these sites confirms a chilling reality. These humans had advanced temporal awareness. They had seasonal calendars running in their heads, planning their city building projects in late summer, long before the first snowflake fell. But surviving inside a sealed bone dome brings up a terrifying new problem. If you seal a room that tightly and you light a fire, you will suffocate on the smoke. So, how did they solve it? They invented a prehistoric HVAC system. In a treeless desert, wood doesn't exist. Chemical analysis of the hearth residues at the Kostroma site shows these engineers processed mammoth dung and cracked mammoth bones, saturating the spongy marrow with animal fat. They chemically manipulated this mix to generate specific, hyper-intense heat outputs. To keep from suffocating, archaeological evidence shows they carved small vents near the floor to constantly pull in fresh, oxygen-rich air. Simultaneously, they built larger exhaust vents at the absolute peak of the dome. Because hot air rises, the toxic smoke and heavy human breath was pushed straight out the top. Continuous fresh air. Zero interior frost. And they needed this perfect system because they were locked inside these domes for months. Which brings us to a secret of human biology that science only recently rediscovered. What happened when the sun went down? For hundreds of thousands of years, humans did not sleep for 8 unbroken hours. In 1992, a landmark experiment by psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Weir proved that when modern humans are removed from artificial light, their brains automatically revert to a biphasic sleep cycle. Our ancestors would sleep for 4 hours after sunset. Then, they would naturally wake up in the dead of night for about 2 hours. Finally, they would go back to sleep until dawn. And it was during those 2 wakeful midnight hours that human culture was truly born. Renowned anthropologist Dr. Polly Wiesner spent years studying the Jew/Huansi Bushmen of the Kalahari, one of the last groups living close to this original human pattern. She documented something incredible. During the daylight, 80% of human conversation was pure logistics, hunting, surviving. But at midnight, around the hearth, 81% of conversation was storytelling. This was the original classroom, the famous beautifully carved Paleolithic Venus figurines, the breathtaking cave paintings. They weren't made during summer vacations. They were crafted by flickering firelight during the dark, freezing hours of the long winter confinement. But eventually, they did have to step outside. When they ventured out into the Ice Age, they wore garments that put your modern winter jacket to shame. Excavations at Denisova Cave in Siberia uncovered perfectly carved bone needles dating back 40,000 years. These humans weren't just throwing a raw bearskin over their shoulders, they used advanced spatial reasoning and composite tailoring. They engineered suits using soft, wicking Arctic hair on the inside, hollow-core caribou fur in the middle to trap dead air, and tough, frost-resistant wolf fur lining the hood to break the wind. It was the exact same physics used in modern extreme weather gear, engineered purely from necessity, 25,000 years before Gore-Tex existed. Their engineering was so undeniably perfect that today we are still trying to catch up. Right now, elite modern military Arctic training programs and global disaster relief organizations are actively studying the excavation data from Mejirish and Kostroma. They are teaching their soldiers how to build survival shelters derived straight from these 20,000-year-old mammoth bone and underground blueprints. Because when the power grid fails and modern technology shatters, the ancient physics of the Earth never do. We lost this knowledge for 10 millennia, spent billions reinventing it, only to discover our ancestors had already solved it perfectly. So the next time the cold weather hits and you reach for that thermostat without even thinking, remember what it actually cost to get there. You didn't invent warmth, you inherited it. You inherited it from the most relentless, ingenious engineers to ever walk the earth, who had nothing but the cold, time, and an absolute refusal to die.